Okay. I'm gonna mention it too, then maybe. I'll say, hey, we're gonna use Icarus stuff.
Yeah, good. That sounds good. Yeah, I think it works super well.
Yeah, it does. It
And
does.
especially at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's not 100%, but neither is a human either.
100%. Yeah.
So, like at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's good.
Yep. Okay. Welcome everyone. Uh, can you please take a seat the back there? Welcome everyone. This is Bot Auth. This is our first meeting. The chairs here, David and myself will be chairing this working group. And we have Mike Bishop is our AD. So Mike, do you want to come and say a word or two?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. This is our first meeting for Bot Auth, which we had a nice ball last time around, and we've got the charter sorted out. And now we get to actually get down to the technical work of it. I'm the area director for Web and Internet Transport. This is one of my working groups. Oh.
Use the mic, Mike.
All right. Just needs to come up higher then. So I'm the responsible area director. If you have any questions about stuff that's going on, I mean, obviously run with the chairs first, but if there's something that they're not able to address for you, I'm your next point of contact. I know along with AI Pref is in a similar state, we have a fair number of people here who are not normal IETF participants. So we just, if there's anything we can do to help you acclimate and understand our working style, please do engage. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, before we get going, we're gonna rely on Eker's AI agent to take notes. So thanks, Eker. Okay, let's get going. Okay. So this is our Notewell. This is a new Notewell. If you're not familiar with Notewell, please take a look at it. It governs everything that we do at the IETF. It talks about how to behave properly, professionally, and respectfully. It talks about anti-harassment. It talks about IPR. So it's really critical and important for you to understand this. And specifically, we're lingering here because this is our first meeting. And if you have any questions and issues, feel free to reach out to the chairs, and we could help with any issues that you encounter here. Tips here, make sure to sign in to that data tracker, especially for a new working group. So we would like to know how many people attend here. So we would plan accordingly for next meetings. And also it allow you to join the queue to be able to ask questions or comments. For a remote participant, please make sure you are on mute unless you wanna speak up. And when you join the queue, please state your name before you start speaking. Okay, so here is our agenda. We have we're gonna start with our Bot Auth architecture. Thibault will get us started. Arndt will be talking about SPIFFE, and then Thibault will talk about signature, directory, and registry. Bobby will be talking about signature agent. Christopher will be talking about HTTP signature issues, and Sarah will wrap it up with use cases that affect Bot Auth. Any comments, questions, bash to the agenda? Okay, let's get it going then. Okay, I'm gonna stop this. And Thibault, do you wanna come here?
Okay, does the clicker work?
Hold on, we just need there. There, it should work now.
Okay, it does. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for making it. And yeah, first presentation is about how do we do, how can we use HTTP message signatures for automated traffic, and how can they use that to identify themselves? The draft, which is related to that, is referenced as the architecture draft, which at the moment is like referenced here. This is work that has been improved that I've done with Senda. Yeah, we're going to share the presentation, and I'm going to get you started. So at a high level, what does this draft present? It does mention two parties. So you have an agent and an origin. The agent and the origin would share some cryptographic material. The means through which this cryptographic material is exchanged can be like through different ways. It can be like done preemptively, such as like the agent would contact the origin, say, hey, this is my cryptographic material. Maybe the origin will discover the cryptographic material of the agent out of band, and this is left as a second item in the document. Once that is known and established, when an agent will make a request to the origin, they will send, along with that request, a signature. The signature will contain the signature input, and a signature agent. The signature agent is something we will discuss in the directory draft later on. It's an indicator where the origin can retrieve the keys from the agent. It doesn't need to happen on pass, but that's an indicator where you can get the keys for that agent. The signature input covers two parameters. The first one is the authority, which is the hostname, more or less, of the origin which is being accessed. And the signature agent is included as well as part in the scope of the signature being provided. You have a couple of parameters which are passed as well, such as like when the signature was created, when it expires, a key ID, which is derived from the cryptographic key material, the public key material, which is a JSON web thumbprint, encoded in base64. And finally, you have the tag, which specifies that this one is for WEBBOTAUTH. In terms of description, what we want to achieve is we're using HTTP message signature as defined by RFC 9421 for authenticating non-browser clients to websites intended for browsers. It uses signature agent for discovery. The origin can return, accept signatures if it wants to get more parameters signed, and there's a nonce that can provide some basic features for anti-replay. Overall, I invite you, if you haven't gone through, to go through the draft. The draft is presented in various sections. On the left side of the screen, basically we have introduction, motivation, and why we use the HTTP layer, which is also part of how this group was charted. And then we enter the architecture. Probably there's a better name for that. It can be a protocol, a presentation. That's something that we can refine on. The architecture presents the deployment models, the way a bot/agent can generate a signature, how can origin request a signature, and if they need more parameters, how they validate the signatures, and finally covers a part of the key distribution and discovery out of band via public list signature agent header, and possibly other mechanisms down the line. On the right side, we have the various security consideration. I didn't include them. There are also a couple of privacy considerations which are part of the draft. Some test vectors which have been used by the various implementations, as well as the list for implementation for client servers and the test vectors in the JSON format. On that, I will leave it to Senda to explain the rest.
Thank you. So my name is Sándor Major, also known as Alex, which is the same name just in English. On the previous slides, you saw that the keys were exchanged somehow, and then there's the signature. This slide goes into the on-pass discovery, where the signature is sent first, and then the origin can look at the signature agent header to know which agent is actually calling the origin, and then the origin can call back to the agent, fetch the well-known pass which contains the keys of the agent, and then they can verify the signature, and then send back a response or reject the request, depending on that. So there are multiple implementations. If you open the slides, you can go to that link, and there are different implementations both for the verifier and the signer. On the interoperability side, we have some test vectors. So that's one topic that we probably need to discuss. Like, what else do we need? Maybe we can have some kind of a collection of tests, like a web platform test kind of stuff that like any verifier or any signer could run against their system. And then greasing is an open question. Okay, so there are 22 open issues on GitHub. We will need to review those and move to the new IETF managed Git repo. And then a few open questions. So first is optimization. So just performance numbers could be problematic. Like I work for Google, so it's at that scale. Things add up very fast. So if you're sending out millions of requests per second, then if every request contains a huge payload, it can be problematic. So that is something I'd like to discuss with the audience. Replay of the signatures, I think it is another question that keeps coming back. So do you sign over the domain only or the entire pass? Do you include the nonce? Like, do we allow for the signatures to be replayed multiple times? On-demand signing is something that we were thinking that, if most of the websites currently, they don't really care about these signatures, then do we actually want to sign all these requests? And the current proposal has this 403 error with an accept signature response, where basically the origin could signal back that, hey, I actually need a signature. So on-demand signing could be something where you don't sign first, and then the website can say, actually, please sign the request if you have an agent identity. It can introduce extra round trips and stuff. So this is something to be discussed. Session binding could be another optimization. So if the signature is bound to the TLS, then it has pros and cons as well. So we would like to discuss that as well. Maybe exchanging the signature to a cookie could be one way to reduce the number of signatures sent over the wire, or like these huge payloads could be exchanged to a shorter cookie. Key ID type and how to calculate it is something that came up. We had a little back and forth on GitHub issues where, like, okay, what type of key ID to use? Should we thumbprint the JOT keys, or should we just let the users use whatever key ID they currently have? And then a best practice document. It is actually part of the charter to produce something like that, to go through the best practices. Okay, and this is the last slide. So with that, I think we can open it up for discussions.
Okay, questions, comments? Yeah, go for it.
So this is not an architecture. You can tell because it has test vectors.
I agree. And that's why the name of the document initially dash architecture is kind of like a misfit.
Oh, it's like a minus architecture?
The what?
It's like a minus, it's like a negative?
Okay, basically this document has been referenced in various places, and I do agree that as part of the adoption, if there's one of these documents, it should be renamed to protocol, presentation, something else.
Yeah, I think we need to take a step back, way, way, way back, and ask about the problem we're trying to solve and what the appropriate mechanisms for solving it, not like the names of the header fields on the signature identifiers. And I'm not even clear on the answer to that. So to give you a single piece of, let me just like narrow in on two pieces of this. The first is like all this use of signatures. Like maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not. Like, is it in fact desirable to have it be undeniable that you made the request, or is it undesirable to have it be undeniable you made the requests? I don't think anybody's ever come down on that. I can imagine arguments in both directions. So that's point one. Point two, and I don't propose to discuss that. What I'm saying is that that's something we have to kind of thing we have to resolve. The second thing is the semantics of what these keys mean and the signatures mean and the domains they're tied to. I still don't understand. And you and I talked about this a few minutes ago. Like when I connect to an HTTPS domain, right? And I go to HTTPS like example.com. The implied semantics are the people who own example.com want me to have this data. And one could imagine, and if Google connected to you and with Googlebot and they did MTLS, which I guess they can't do anymore because of the keys, but if they could and they signed the thing, you would know that Google was making that request. And I don't understand. And as far as I understand from what is going on here, I cannot infer anything from the fact that the origin of the places the signatures are stored is Google.com or Cloudflare.com at all. And I have to learn that in some out of band fashion, right? That may or may not be desirable, but we need to sort that out. So and I'm going to say this for every document that's up here, so like we can just get used to it. Like none of these should be adopted. What needs to be written is an overall architecture, a description of the problem statement, and an overall architecture of what we're trying to do, and what the security properties intended to provide are. And then once we have that, then we can discuss whether it should be signatures or what the names of the key IDs should be, or the test vectors should be, and where things should be stored. But that's the problem that has to get solved first, not the problem of this. Though this may in fact be definitely fine.
Thanks, Ecker. And as a reminder for others, if you're next in queue, please walk up to the mic and speak your name.
My name, Martin Thompson. Sorry, it's been a long week. I was going to say what Ecker said. I'm reasonably convinced that there's a signature involved, but I don't know what's being signed. And I don't know what's being signed. Well, I mean, you're telling me what I should be signing, but I don't understand why that's the case because none of the documents, and there's quite a lot of them, establish why. And I think there's a big gap here. And having some discussion in the documents that simply lays out, here's the problem as we understand it, and here's the approach that we're taking and why that is relevant in this case. And even at this stage of the process, though I don't know that it needs to get published at any point, alternatives, why you think this thing is superior to approaching it a different way. And I think there's a number of options you could look at that I think personally might be superior to this. This is not cheap, what you're describing here. And my reaction to that is, well, are we going to ask all the people who are making millions of requests to pay that price? And in particular, are we asking the people who are terminating all of those requests to also pay that price? Because this is not cheap.
Brian.
Brian Campbell. It's hard to follow Ecker and Martin, but I was going to say similar things. This has been presented as an architecture document with a very, very specific solution to a problem that's not stated. And perhaps it was accidental, but a number of things you said during the presentation very much made it sound like you had an assumption that this was going to go forward and be adopted as a working group document, which it's hard to sit on the other side of a presentation and kind of hear that expectation when there's obviously some differences of opinion about the work itself. And I know there are deployed variations of this, but we're not here to rubber stamp something that certain large companies have done. I don't know. That's my personal opinion, maybe. I'll put it that way. And from a performance standpoint, from the early days of the discussion about this, I know it's hard to separate like the problem space from solutions, but the idea of using some kind of simplified MTLS negotiation, which allows for a much more efficient approach to sort of like proving some kind of cryptographically proving some kind of client identity over the course of a number of different requests feels like a much better approach than at least a signature over every request. And maybe that's too far into the weeds for right this, but it feels very strange to be up here talking about this as the solution. And I would be curious to know what happened to that sort of line of thinking and how we got to here. But then I also agree, we're probably not in a position to adopt this. So
Thanks, Ryan. Jonathan.
Hi, Jonathan. Jonathan Williams. It's unclear to me, and I think Eka said the same thing, how the .well known is supposed to be interpreted, because anyone can host a .well known of someone else's keys on their domain. So it's not clear how that relates to knowing which bot it is or not.
Oh, yeah. I think mostly I was waiting for the end, but I will answer some of the questions that have been said. Good. Starting with Martin, and if I missummarize like what was said, I definitely agree that there's been some work through this document before this solution came into place, and probably we can do a much better job, but explaining, laying out the various alternatives that have been considered, why the work stopped there, why there's definitely a lot of performance improvement on the table. Similar to what Brian said, there were earlier consideration for request and TLS that was presented in the HTTP working group, if I'm not mistaken, and why this has been eluded. And yeah, doing that work would be important. To answer some of the question the .well known and the binding, this is, I think, part of the kind of key discovery process. What kind of binding do you want, and strongly do you want that when a domain hosts a .well known, they actually own the key is something that we can discuss.
Right.
Sorry, just also want to reflect on the MTLS stuff, and the payload size and the computation overhead needed for this is also a big concern for me. But I think implementing this on the TLS layer would take many years, so that's my biggest concern on that side. And yeah, I agree. I forgot the name. Sorry, the gentleman who asked the last question. The when you share the keys, it can technically be a different entity, but I think that's not necessarily a problem. So you can just think of it as somebody who attests that this request is coming from a certain party.
Hello, Antoine Sancourt, Huawei. I have a very naive question, so bear with me in advance. When you mentioned the agent and the origin, do you assume that the origin is a website of some sort, or can it be another agent, for instance, going back to discussions that happen in several side meetings around the Internet of Agents first? And second, in the authentication that you are doing, the bot authenticates towards the origin. Is there a sort of mutual authentication involved there?
So first question, do we assume the origin is a website? Oh, sorry. Yes. Is there mutual authentication from the bots to the origin? The bots authenticating to a website will use whatever transport is needed, and given we're using HTTP, we will rely on TLS, which should provide some sort of backward authentication.
Thank you. And as a reminder, everyone in the room, please speak really closely to the mic. We have a hard time hearing up here on stage.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. I only get to say this one time because this is a new working group. I think not everybody here has the full context of what has happened prior to this working group being formed. I was involved in some of the early discussions. I've been kind of out of the last couple of meetings. So I would love to get reminded of what is the problem we're here to solve. I see a lot of chat going on that's related to this, which is there's clearly a mismatch of like, what are the assumptions being made and the roles of the parties and who's got the interests where, and like what is the action, because this is a potentially a huge space to solve of just bot auth, but it sounds to me like you have something very specific in mind and are coming at it with a lot of assumptions about how it should work, but that's not represented in the document or in the presentation. So I think just like rewind a little bit and let's go back to like, what are we trying to do here? And specifically, what are the constraints you're trying to work within? What are the, so yeah, I was expecting more of a higher level architecture for the first presentation, I guess.
Yeah, Eric Pasquala. I'm going to +1 Aaron, and in fact do what is probably the most annoying thing that ever happens to presenters and chairs, which is we should not see the next 3 presentations. Instead, because like it's perfectly clear there's a big mismatch in terms of what this is trying to accomplish. And so the idea that we're going to like spend the next hour or whatever discussing like a bunch of details about people's presentations just is not like a helpful way for the working group to proceed. And so I would ask the chairs to think about how they can structure this, to maybe take a few minutes and think about how you can structure this discussion in a way that will actually make some progress that is not like seeing presentations be totally overtaken by events. As a concrete example, supposing that we decided that signatures were bad, then everything else would be irrelevant. So like, it's just not helpful for us to spend the next like hour doing that. I'm sorry, like, but that's just the way it is.
So I think on like what is being discussed, I think the charter gives a good overview, and maybe we should have started with that, probably just going through what is the problem. I think that's good feedback. Thank you.
And we're going to take the last question from the queue, and then the chairs will confer.
Hi, Kevin O'Connor, representing Internet Archive. We can see both sides of this, the benefits from knowing who's crawling this. We get scraped a ton, and we also do some of our own crawling. I think we can foresee big issues around this with big content providers signing WBA agreements and edging out smaller participants, kind of crowding out the market, governments and companies using this to identify who's accessing their sites. Things like the walled gardens of iOS and Android and Windows 11, maybe starting the path towards having to credentialize everybody from using a browser. And generally speaking, any benefit that we may get from being a site that gets abused by crawlers is almost certainly not worth the damage that we think this may have on the ecosystem at large. So worth like revisiting, as everybody has said, the initial assumptions around some of this. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're hearing loud and clear that we might have come out of the gate a little quick on this, going into problem solving, and what we need is an architecture document or even an architecture conversation to focus on the details of the problem to be solved and the requirements on a solution more than a particular solution. Give the chairs a second to confer on how best to proceed forward. Because you have a point, Ecker, and you're correct that it's very annoying. Give us a minute. All right. Since last time you mentioned that putting you on the spot was the way to get you to do stuff. Um,
get everyone on the same page. Well, and to make sure that to validate the assumptions baked into them. Yeah, sure. Oh, geez. Okay.
All right, so what we're going to do is Mark gave a presentation at the BOF last time on background and use cases, and we're thinking we can run through a variation of that Mark is going to improv on the spot. So to kind of help validate these assumptions. So
you get to witness how small my context window is.
So you can start talking, and I will furiously get you your slides from last time in case that's helpful. Or should I not even bother?
No, give it a go.
All right, you got
See
it.
what you can find. So this work started because the simple observation that the current state of dealing with non-browser or automated traffic is pretty horrid in that best practice, if you can call it best, is to use some combination of user agent, which doesn't really work, or IP addresses, which cause all sorts of operational issues, and generally it's not good practice to try to identify parties on the internet using IP addresses, or reverse DNS, which has a number of issues as well. And so the thought was, what if we had cryptographic identification for bots? And in this, the original use case was kind of well-known actors on the internet, like, for example, search crawlers, archiving crawlers, where it's very common for other parties to identify as those to try and leverage that. Since then, there's been a lot of discussion around what people are calling agentic use cases and more complex compositions, where things get a lot more fuzzy, I think. But that was the original impetus behind the work, was making that situation better, so that ideally we end up in a world where, oh, thank you, a clicker, where you end up in a world where as a web server, you have to deal with a couple of different classes of entities. One would be human users, which, just let them be. One would be cryptographically identified bots, which you know who they are, or you have some idea of who they are, and then you can treat them as you wish. And then you have bots who are pretending to be humans, which is still a problem, but it's a problem that's a little more manageable if the good ones are more solidly identified. Let's see if there's anything interesting in the slide, shall we? On. Oh, yeah. There we go. Oh, yeah. So there's some numbers about, there are lots of bots out there. Sure. Yep. And I guess, it's interesting. I guess the scale of this might be, interesting to talk about as well, in that, just talking to people who operate websites. I was talking to Philippe from the W3C, and they're at the point now where they just are being overwhelmed by automated traffic. The amount of automated traffic going on out there is really getting out of hand. So people need tools to be able to handle it more reasonably. As one example, this isn't working anymore. Oh, there it goes. So yeah, identifying bot traffic. Blah. Yep. Talked about that. Yep. User agents aren't great. Yep. IP has some issues. Yep. Right. So when we talk about the use cases here and the requirements on solutions, first of all, we can't disrupt existing web flows. This has to work for unadorned, web browsers can't be affected. And it needs to be robust in the face of common web infrastructure. So, where there are intermediaries or libraries in use, it has to be easy to deploy. The deployment cost needs to be reasonable on both sides, but especially for websites, especially for small independent websites. There shouldn't be too much overhead or configuration or coordination required by them. Centralization is a concern here. You want to avoid choke points, creating new choke points. So things around, your key management, roots of identity, creating new barriers for deploying new bots on the internet or for deploying sites. This is the area where I think that we probably need a fair amount of discussion to make sure we don't unintentionally create more centralization risk. In subsequent discussions after the BOF, kind of the bar that people felt most comfortable here with seemed to be, it should be no worse than current practice, which is using IP addresses usually. That's a remarkably low bar. I hope we can do better than that, but we'll see. Is that it? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's about it, I reckon. Yeah.
All right, so hopefully that was at least some useful context. Let's open the floor a little bit on how we want to solve this problem, the architecture, or various comments. Martin.
Yeah, Martin Thompson. I just wanted to add a slightly different perspective on this one. I think based on having these discussions, and I think we had the BOF, and then that sort of didn't work out very well, but then there was a side meeting that was much more successful. I think the way that I think about this one, and I put this in the chat, is that there is some future in which the bots are indistinguishable from human. There's no way you can throw a capture at them. There's no way you can use fingerprinting, because a bot that's incentivized to look like a human will look like a human, right, to a large extent. And this is implied in your meme more than anything else. And at that point, a website that's offering service has to offer the same sort of service to every client that comes in and requests, which is fine in a sense, but generally speaking, a lot of these bots are looking for a much higher class of service in certain regards. They're looking for, in some cases, they're looking to avoid things like paywalls and that sort of thing. And so if you're running a search index and you have a site that's got paywalls, often the site will want to make sure that some amount of content is available to a search indexer so that content can be discoverable. So that's one particular thing. The other one is humans don't make millions of requests to websites. They're sort of limited. That may change as agentic browsing becomes more and more part of how people experience the web, but bots generally will be looking for a higher class of service in terms of rate as well. And so the way that I think of this is finding a cryptographic way to give the bots a way to effectively give away some amount of their privacy so that they can build a reputation for good behavior and turn that reputation for good behavior into access to a higher rate of service than a human user would get. And I think that's a helpful way of framing it. I think your questions about centralization and other sorts of things are very important when you think about it that way, because reputation tends to accrue positively to larger entities and things like that. And so naturally we'll have a system, we are building a system that will centralize in certain ways. But my experience with some of this in other contexts is that even small players can interact with that sort of system as long as there are no technical barriers to being able to self-identify in the system. And so I think it's possible. And so that's hopefully a helpful different perspective on this than what Mark presented there.
No, I think that is very helpful. And I think the only thing I'd say there is we really already have a system with centralization risk and pressure, because people are using IP addresses to do this, and that accrues power to a few parties, and it becomes more and more difficult to introduce new parties into that. So this is one of the things that we need to think about and figure out, how do we reduce those forces or at least mitigate them so that it's not just continually shuffling more and more power to 2 or 3 parties or whatever it is.
Hi, Eric Scorla. So, as they say, the internet is for users. And I think I find it a little unfortunate that so much of this framing,
I'm glad you enjoyed that, Alyssa,
is about the needs of the site operators, which are quite far down in the hierarchy, in the party constituencies, right? it's not quite clear when bots sit in the priority constituencies, but I think it might possibly be above the set operators. Certainly some of those bots are, but some of those bots are operated by small scale entities, not large scale entities.
Mm.
So when I, for instance, attempt to access the data tracker to scan the AI minutes, and I have to give it a special user agent string, so I can do like 5 requests a minute, that's bad news, right? Like that's like not good. And when civil society organizations want to scan government websites and they have to do special things, that's bad, right?
Right.
And so like those people are like acting, I think, much more like on behalf of users than one might think about, like when you ask the question to some big search engine, for instance. So like I think I want to put this, so I think there's like a lot of discussion in the chat about like what are the privacy expectations and rights of like these automated agents. But I think especially in a world where like there's agentic browsing, like those start to look a lot more like the privacy rights and expectations of users than they do like the privacy expectations and rights of sites. And so like, just to put my priors on the table, anonymous browsing is good. Identified browsing is bad. And the only reason identified browsing is if we absolutely have to for some reason. It's not the first place to go. And so like so to contextualize that, I think the question Martin was asking is quite good, is what is the thing we were trying to, so like this is, I mean, I understand with the charter, but like, I just don't care right now. The question at hand is, how do we protect sites who have to take very high traffic loads from automated agents in a way that helps them differentiate good actors and bad actors? It is not, how do we identify this site is Googlebot and this site is not Google. This site is Googlebot and not Google. That's bad, not good. And we may have to do it, but it's bad, not good. And so, and it's also not, by the way, how do we allow the site to get traffic from Googlebot and not Bingbot? That's bad, not good.
Right.
So I think maybe if we start with that attitude, we might get a slightly different solution set than the solutions that I think people were contemplating. Again, we may have to compromise on those values because the world is not a simple place, but I think that's where I would like to start, rather than sort of the state of like the problem statements that identify every automated agent on the internet. And I know in the IETF we don't like to do this. We don't like to talk about like crossing the streams, but like a world where we also have privacy pass, and some of the odds like a privacy pass is I have to like an iPhone in order to browse the internet, and a world in which like everybody in the internet has to like be in some bot directory or have an iPhone is a really, really bad world. So let's not create that world.
Absolutely, and that's where it gets back to the centralization concern. I think that's a really helpful framing, Ecker. I'll tell you, for me, the motivation for this, which I know other people have different motivations, but for me, it's not to identify a particular party. It's to say, when a web browser accesses your site, you know that it is being filtered through that code base, which is the web browser. And so you know that it's going to have a certain access profile. And it's probably not going to be abusive because a web browser behaves in a predictable way. The problem with bots, and especially, unfortunately, a lot of the small bots is they can be really badly coded and be quite abusive to the site. So if I have a way to say, okay, well, this bot has behaved reasonably in the past, and I have a reasonable amount of confidence that's going to behave in a decent way now, I can give it a certain level of access. But if some bot comes along and is making a ridiculous number of requests, or not following robots.txt or whatever, and that's an abusive bot, and I need to be able to very quickly identify it and say no.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that problem. I guess the way I have to back up again, sorry, Aaron, is that like that story you just told me at the web browser, right? Like you say that, but like actually, like that's only if you have some like PAT or like WEI kind of thing. Like an open source web browser can do anything it wants, right? And it's not required to behave in any particular way. So
in theory, sure.
So it's actually, I mean, like in theory, yes, but I guess I'm really trying to avoid a situation where we have the only people who can use the internet are people who have closed systems that have deterministic behavior that some particular person has deemed acceptable. That's like a terrible outcome. And I'd rather have 95% traffic be bots than have that.
Right. And 100% agree with you, and that's why we wrote the centralization concerns into the charter. I think we probably could have done better there, and not only centralization concern, but also keeping the internet an open system, not making it a closed system.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. So I'm trying to understand the context here again. It seems to me that the word bot is throwing this discussion into some areas that I'm hearing are not the intended areas. Is it fair to say that we're actually specifically talking about crawlers rather than bots? Because one of the things that bot has implied in this conversation is a bot that is acting on behalf of a particular user using software, right? So is this just about the crawlers, like the automated crawling, or are we talking about also identifying software that a user is using and interacting with?
So that is a very good and topical question. We specifically answered it in the charter, and we didn't cover it today, but the answer that we came to consensus on was that identifying a specific bot or a specific AI agent, let's say your favorite brand of agent, was a much easier problem than identifying that and which user it is acting on behalf of / which permissions it has. And so the working group was chartered to solve the first problem. So let's say it is this brand of AI agent. The question of saying which user it's on behalf of and what permissions does that user grant the specific request to do are left as a future milestone possible item for this working group after a recharter. And the reason for that was that that's a much harder problem. And there was a will to tackle the simpler problem. And you're right that most of those cases are crawlers, but I wouldn't necessarily pick that word as the keystone necessarily.
Okay, so it is in scope to be able to identify requests made by software that a user is specifically interacting with at that one time. So like a user types in a query into software, that software makes a request to a server, and that is intended to be in scope of this?
I would more describe it as who's operating the server. So let's say if the user is talking to their favorite AI agent that's run by their favorite company, it would identify this product from that company. But conceptually, if we were to use signatures, the user machine wouldn't necessarily have the private key. I mean, that's way down in the solution space, but conceptually, it's
not trying to get to the solution.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just trying to explain.
But one of the important things here is the difference between having it in scope to be able to tie that request to a user's browser or explicitly not doing that.
Explicitly not in scope?
Or explicitly not in scope to identify the user or that particular instance of the user's software.
Okay, so crawler is maybe too narrow of a definition. So you're using bot to describe server machines that are making requests out, and you're trying to identify the server.
That's a good approximation. Yeah,
sort of.
Okay.
Thanks. All right, we have a few more folks in the queue. Once we drain it, we have conferred, and we're going to have Sarah's presentation, which was originally at the end. But first, let's keep going with the queue. DKG.
Hi there. I've also been disturbed by the risks of anonymous browsing. And I just wanted to point out that there may be crawlers or agents that are not directly operated by an individual user that nonetheless may still legitimately want to be indistinguishable from other bots. So for example, it seems problematic to me if, say, Google has a shopping platform, and if you offer different prices to Google users than to non-Google users, then a bot that was crawling on behalf of, say, Consumer Reports, which is trying to identify what the best pricing options are, would need to identify itself instead of saying, I would like to see what an anonymous user is going to see on this site so that I can do adequate price comparison and cross-shopping, right? The Consumer Reports bot is actually operating on behalf of many users, even if they're not operating directly as a result of a browser query. And what they need to be able to see is the generic anonymous view of the web. And if we say that the generic anonymous view of the web is going to go away because the only way we're going to allow this traffic is by picking specific clients to browse it, that seems very problematic to me. So I think there's privacy problems even in the larger case where if we somehow manage to cleave the browser activity from this scope.
So DKG, I think the state we want to get to is that if that consumer reports bot doesn't need to exceed the envelope of what a normal browser does, driven by a human, that it should be able to go about its business and not.
But it does. It does. I mean, remember that what is the job of consumer reports bot, right? It needs to see all of the washing machines that are available for sale to compare them and catalog them. And frankly, I as a user cannot do that. That's the reason that I use consumer reports, is because they are capable of doing that kind of work.
Right. I think one of the challenges here is identifying that envelope of what a normal browser, how it would behave, because it's mostly about rate limiting and what looks like abusive traffic. And what we're seeing is a lot of sites are getting less and less patient with abusive traffic from automated clients.
Yep. Want to basically reiterate more or less what's on what's on the slide. There are definitely from origin traffic, and I would reuse I think Martin's example. If all traffic is
speak a bit closer to the microphone, please.
Oh, can you hear me better now? Okay. If all origin traffic, all traffic an origin receive is indistinguishable, like bot and human, they feel I don't know, that could be great. I think there's some reality in a way that you would have some of that traffic, and because bots would do a lot more requests than human, which you would like to make sure that every client is treated fairly, and that's not necessarily something that you would be able at the moment to do from the origins. And so one of the patterns that has emerged is you have these big centralized crawlers that have dedicated IP space that are able to manage it, and you have smaller crawlers, smaller bots that are not able to manage that are not able to manage the IP addresses. And this definitely creates also some unfairness on the bot side. They're not able to go and access easily the information that is on the internet. And as part of that, and I do agree with a lot of the comment, there was a lot of heavy lifting in terms of how we jumped into the solution. But it's important, I think, to recognize that part of the centralization is definitely on the origin side, where we don't want one origin to be able to register all the bots, but we also want to make sure that all bots have a fair access to the internet. And it's important to recognize they have different needs than human users, because they might do more requests, they might have requests for different type of pattern. And I think this is really important to keep in mind in the discussion as well.
Thank you, Thibault. Alyssa?
I'm going back to the last thing that you said, Mark. I'm wondering if there was sort of consideration between the difference regarding the difference between the need to identify the entity that's providing the bot, as the charter describes, the company, the developer, or the product, versus what you just said, which is really about the bot's behavior. So there's this conversation happening in the chat about reputation.
Right.
And is it the fact that because historically we used the identity of the bot as a proxy for its behavior or its reputation, that we're going to basically entrench that cryptographically? Or do we envision some sort of future where the cryptographic identity is the sort of stepping stone towards some eventual reputation system, and that's the thing that actually ultimately sites would end up relying on? Because it seems like a poor proxy. The entity identity seems like a poor proxy, when the thing that that the site actually wants to be able to determine is if this is a quote unquote well-behaved bot, for whatever definition that is. So I'm just curious, why did the charter end up with the corporate developer or product identity as the thing that needs to be authenticated, when the concern is actually, I think, divorced from the identity of the bot, or that's a separate use case. So yeah.
The part of this, that was definitely part of the discussions around the solution space, that one of the ends we could have ended up with was that you don't have any way to tie the identity of the bot to a real world entity, that it's just, how has this bot, I see this bot has come to me again, it has the same cryptographic identity, how has it behaved in the past, and therefore how do I want to treat it? And it builds up reputation over time. And that has some nice properties, but it becomes more difficult to introduce new bots with that because they have to build up that reputation over time. And so especially in the side meeting we had after the BOF, people wanted to have more of a sense of, how do I tie this to real world identity so I can make decisions based upon that, or at least have that option to be able to do that. I think that that's a great discussion for the working group to have of what the appropriate approach to be taking is. And if we decide that maybe that's not the best thing for the ecosystem, well, let's go there.
Much of what I was going to say was just said by Mark about rehashing this identity problem. But I will say that I mentioned it in the chat again, and I'm sort of looking at like the point about consumer reports and just broadly rethinking that this might be sort of like notoriously bad mechanism design. And like if we enable websites to block consumer reports from indexing their products, like we will have done a very harmful thing. And so I guess like I would almost want us to reconsider like what the actual outcomes we're trying to engineer are, and which unintended outcomes we can actually practically avoid, even if it might be harder, it might take longer, it might be harder to adopt, harder to make software that is easy for people to use. Maybe the outcomes will just be far superior if we take that effort.
Right. I think that's a good framing, and getting back to the use cases and figuring out what outcomes do we want and what outcomes do we not want to see, and if we can carve it in a way that gets us to those results. This is why I personally pushed back fairly strongly on adding all the agentic use cases here, because we have a hard enough problem, even though the traditional web crawling bot problem is relatively well understood and stable. Getting good outcomes there is going to be challenging enough, and adding new use cases to it is going to make it even more challenging.
John Levine, listening to this discussion, you could take out bot and write in email spam.
Even closer to the mic, John, please.
Sorry. Listening to this discussion, I could cross out bot and write in email, and the spam problem is remarkably similar. I mean, the stuff you were saying, like you need to ramp up and you need to, and you don't know who somebody is other than they're probably the same entity that had the same signature. Like that's how DKIM works. So while I don't think that they are exactly analogous, I think there's probably, given that we have 30 years of dealing with spam and of essentially the same problem of a mixture of nice people and horrible people trying to stuff their way into our systems, that there's probably some overall approaches of developing relationships. We have had some attempts to have sort of signers, like Paul Hoffman and I did one that turned out to be a complete failure, where basically you could have people say like, I'm an entity that I vouch that these guys are nice. And my guess is you're going to, it's messy and it's very incomplete. But after 3 decades, I don't think we're going to find anything much better. And I think that semantically this is close enough that I would, just sort of take a look at what we did for spam and particularly look at all the bad ideas that we gave up on, because my guess is they will be equally bad here.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. And certainly you think about, the block lists and so forth that people use. There's a lot of similarities. I think the big difference is that email spam is about content and this is about wire behavior.
It's not entirely.
For the core use case.
Yeah, no, I mean, if I send, particularly here during the campaign season, if I send 3 messages saying vote for Mark to my friends, it's okay. If I send a million copies of the same message to people who don't know me, it's not okay. So it really is a lot of it is about the stuff that's okay at small scale, but not okay at large scale.
Yeah, I think the other complication here is that, once you get past that core use case of, I want to make sure that we're not allowing abuse, of our systems, from a load standpoint.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who want to load other use cases onto this mechanism and say, well, I want to be able to discriminate between clients for other purposes. And that's where I think all these ecosystem risks come in.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm repeating myself, but yeah, been there.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for the discussion.
Are you done with me?
Definitely not, but for now, yes. So thank you, Mark. We're now going to have a presentation from Sarah, which is equally kind of high level and not going into the, so let me get your,
Try and speak closely to the microphone. Okay, so I'm first going to acknowledge that I'm nervous getting up here because people who talk about their scraping tend to get cease and desists and they tend to get sued. And it can be kind of scary. So today I'm going to try and speak on behalf of my customers and talk about their use cases, which we consider to be abundantly legitimate, and talk about, sort of what we think about when we look at this problem of WEBBOTAUTH. I should probably say something about Sequentum as well. Sequentum is a scraping platform. We have on-prem software in the cloud. We also do data as a service as sort of our headlights into what are the complicated use cases. We also have operating guidelines. We're very concerned with doing things the right way. We don't pull copyrighted content. We don't pull personal data. We don't log in or create fake accounts. We don't hit sites too hard. We spend a lot of time going to sites like SimilarWeb and looking at what are the average daily page loads and staying under 1% for a given customer and up to 5% across all customers. I was amused at one point to find our name on Datadome, which is a bot blocking company site, calling us a good bot. So from our point of view, we have seen that web data is mission critical for data-driven decision-making across almost every industry, whether it's commercial or governmental or civic-oriented or non-governmental. And this long predates this age of AI crawlers and the problem I think we're trying to solve today. But basically every decision now is data-driven. And really what scraping provides is visibility into what's happening in that public sphere so that they can adjust accordingly. And if they don't do that, then they're left out, right? So political activity is an easy use case, right? Anyone who's running a campaign or concerned about particular issues who wants to get their issue higher priority, they're going to be monitoring what's happening in social media. This information is going to be driving their strategy. And if this wasn't happening, then you would really have a concentration of power in the hands of the people that had better or more access. So you really do want this to continue. E-commerce, this is really obvious, right? We all traveled here. Anything that is sold online, whether it's sneakers or even B2B, any supplies for any industry, this is all an e-commerce use case, and they are all monitoring prices and inventory and availability and product descriptions and promotions, and they're doing it in real time, and they're doing it to optimize their own businesses, and their margins are so thin that if they're not doing this, they're going to lose. So travel, for example, this is one of the oldest use cases in scraping, right? The online travel agencies started a long, long time ago. And certain players didn't want to participate in this sort of mutual visibility network, right? You had Southwest, and they came out with cease and desist and lawsuits, and they took scrapers and airlines and online travel agencies to court, and they basically managed to get themselves out of this system. And then they had a real business problem because they were totally invisible. Nobody was buying tickets from them, and they almost went out of business. So then in the last year or two, they joined back in, right? This is not something that's going away. This is how the markets are working. Real estate, same thing. And it's not just valuations. It's not just what is the price per square foot or where, are their new housing starts. It's what's happening around that real estate. What's happening, what is the sentiment around the playgrounds? What is the sentiment around the coffee shops nearby? How do people feel safe in that neighborhood? Right? This is all information that's coming from scraping. This visibility is something that is of value to everyone, not just to large investors that are large developers that want to build out new areas, but to people who just want to figure out where they're going to set down roots for their family. investment, right? We have a lot of customers in the investment space. It's called the alt data industry, right? You have traditional data, which is the earnings reports that come out quarterly or however often that's going to happen now. And then you have alternative data sources, right? And these alternative data sources are what are giving incredible insights into where a company is going to be come earnings day, right? Right now, they're saying that 95% of institutional investment decision-making is data-driven. But it's not just institutional, it's the little guys too. Schwab reports that 30% of their new investment accounts this year are from Gen Z. Those are teenagers and 20-somethings. And guess what? They're using scraping. You can have incredible insight into brands and products and trends using scraping. The government. We have a lot of government customers. We have customers police agencies that are fighting human trafficking. Did you know that human trafficking is a scraping use case? You look up whatever the word is that you basically call to IBM Watson or one of the LLMs. You figure out what those terms are that they're using for the victims of human trafficking, and then you search for those terms online in certain forums and places where you know that they're posting these things. You can find those victims in real time. You can do raids, like the background checks. Maybe the government's not doing, maybe it's private companies. This is a pure scraping use case. Does everyone here have to get a background check before they start a new job? That's scraping, right? And you actually, in the US, the law is that report on you, when you go through a background check, has to be delivered within 45 minutes of doing the checks. Do you know how many sites they have to check globally? That's a scraping use case. In the pandemic, the UK NIH used our software to basically monitor the spread of COVID so they could prioritize their resources to protect their people. I could go on and on for hours about use cases, right? NGOs. Hate trackers, have you seen any hate trackers? We have customers that are scraping at scale to basically, detect and track problems that are happening in real time so that they can do something about them. Right? This is a big deal, right? X was accused by the Center for Countering Hate. X sued the Center for Countering Hate because they had scraped them and had issued a report on how they weren't doing a good enough job moderating hate speech on X. They sued them for tens of millions of dollars, right? And the reason why I'm raising these things, these examples, is because, right, the scrapers aren't necessarily something that the sites want on their websites. But if it's a public website, we don't think that they should have a say, right? And they're going to block their opponents, right? Amazon is going to block Walmart, right? McDonald's is going to block Burger King, right? They're just going to turn it off, turn off the bots that are from obviously doing competitive analysis or pricing analysis. Governments are going to turn off watchdogs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. X is going to turn off the Center for Countering Hate. This is data discrimination. Is that what we want? We're going to make it more expensive for these entities to get the data that they need for their mission critical use cases, right? There's also, there is a form of blocking where if they detect that you're a bot, they'll deliver inaccurate or incomplete data to you. Wrong prices, for example. I think somebody mentioned that example earlier. That happens. What's to say it's not going to happen this way too? And the last part is, do we really want to give certain clients a privileged superhighway over others? Is that fair, or is that going to get us into more antitrust cases? So, and I should mention, it was only announced last month, but there is a commercial solution out there where it's a collaboration between a lot of the bot blocking companies, including Akamai with Tollbit and Skyfire, which is a commercial platform where you can basically sign up as a website and sign up as an AI crawler, and you can agree on a price to basically have reliable, fast access to that site's data. So this exists now. So my question is, like, what is and I know this has come up a lot, this was in my slides before the meeting started, but what is the problem we're trying to solve? And who are we solving it for? Right? I think we really need to think long and hard about that. Our opinion, of course, is bot blocking is not the answer. We think the technical reality is bot blocking is just a cat and mouse game, right? If the data is going to be available to humans, it's going to be available to a bot. You know, mission critical use cases are not respecting robots.txt. They're not following terms and conditions, right? They're, you know, in robots.txt, you have a slash search disallowed, right? That is the majority of the scraping use case. You know, there's obviously a scale problem with cease and desists. And the legal precedent is that web scraping is legal. So what are we doing here, right? From our perspective, we need to have accreditation. We need to have data collection standards and guidelines that people adhere to for their data sets to be stamped and accredited as good behavior bots, collected in the right way, and then have the same corollary for AI that's fairly trained, right? I had dinner last night with a number of folks from the big AI providers, and they were talking about how they go to great lengths to try and do the right thing. You know, they're operating the same ambiguous place that we are in scraping. But we think that, you know, there is a better way. I'm not sure it's technical. And that's, you know, that basically wraps up my talk. Alliance for Responsible Data Collection. I'm a steering committee member. We're working on these standards. Please join us.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone have any clarifying questions for Sarah before we move back to, go ahead, and then we'll have a more general conversation.
Chris Patton, thank you for that. That was really useful. What sort of data are you imagining collecting?
Oh, you mean what are the collection standards?
Yeah. Or well what what are we like you know, are we like recording an event where someone violated robots.txt? We have some fingerprint of them and we shove that in a database somewhere. I'm sure that's not exactly what you mean, but I'm just trying to understand.
I think
what the data is.
So when we talk about the Alliance for Responsible Data Collection and data collection standards, we talk about both the behavior and the documentation of the data sets that are collected. So for, you know, Daniel was talking about the Consumer Reports case where they're collecting pricing data. You know, maybe that data set is basically recorded in a very specific way. They're not hitting the site too hard. It's not too many requests that might trigger a denial of service attack, trigger, you know, with Cloudflare or whatever protections they might have. But they would basically collect this data set in the right way. So they're not harming the site. And then in using that data set to drive any AI or any other downstream use cases, the AI would also get accredited as fairly trained.
Got it. I misunderstood. I understood as like collecting data about misbehavior, but you meant actually like what the purpose of scraping.
Thank you for asking that question.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad that that's clarified.
Hiya, Flo Driscoll. I thought this was really, really interesting. But I guess I wanted to pull back to Mark's presentation where he mentioned that like 37% of internet traffic is malicious bots. And I was wondering how that fits into this kind of everyone should behave well on the internet picture. I can't quite put them together.
Well, he said that 70% were human. I find that hard to believe. I think they're probably lumping, you know, all of our type of bot behavior into the human category because they don't see us as bots.
I suppose
but I don't know. It's possible that there is 30% criminal bots, and I think that denial of protection that Cloudflare provides, like for denial of service, I think you know, when you're crossing an authentication barrier, there's a lot of anti-fraud that you can do, right? Those are incredibly valuable services, and I think that they are, you know, probably not in scope for this, but I do think that they are very worthwhile, and nothing should happen to prevent their good use.
Cool. Thanks. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Just to clarify, I think I read that slide as 30% just bots, not necessarily bad bots.
Okay, it's not my slide. I think it said criminal on it at some point, but yeah, I think it said 70% human, which I actually found to be hard to believe.
Yeah, I'm not like debating that point. I'm just I wasn't sure what the 30% was.
It was 4 months ago. That's a long time ago.
We'll have to get back to everyone on that statistic. Bobby, go ahead.
Hey, Bobby Chen, Stitch. This is just a comment. I think you mentioned no technical solution here. I think wherever this accreditation goes, if that's the path, there still needs to be a path to stopping bad bots from impersonating people who are accredited. And so that is something that is valuable. And so I think there are some ecosystem questions going by in the chat. And I do think that overwhelmingly bad bots are impersonating humans already today. No bad bot is going to adopt anything that comes out of WEBBOTAUTH so that they can map all of their malicious activities to some kind of identity for us to block. So I really think those kinds of issues are not super relevant. And I work on a bot detection product, and I see this kind of cat and mouse game that's happening all the time. Thanks.
I just wanted to mention one thing there, and that is I probably should have put in my slides, but when there is this sort of registry, the idea of a registry of bots, and where every organization is going to have a cryptographic signature, right? If you're thinking about like an investor and the sources they're using to drive their investment decision making, that's kind of their intellectual property, right? I mean, I know that's a controversial way to say it, but the sources that a data aggregator uses for their business and their product, like they're exposing that by registering, and they're exposing it to, you know, whoever controls the registry, and I'm not sure what the public access would be. So it's problematic from that point of view too. Sorry, go ahead, Alyssa.
Yeah, I wanted to just shine a little light on a bunch of actors that were not named in this presentation, namely real public interest actors, researchers, archivists, those engaged in the preservation of cultural heritage, who do not monetize the data that they obtain. They collect data for the purposes of scientific inquiry and public benefit. They are often academics and NGOs, and they don't really have the resources to defend themselves one way or the other as the kind of casualties of this debate. And I think they are a better model to keep in our minds when we think about different approaches to this problem, insofar as if we want to be able to have a web that allows their kinds of activities to exist, then I think a lot of their interests sort of end up being intertwined with the commercial actors who engage in similar activity. But if we think about their sort of institutional interests and what they cannot bring to the table when it comes to things like reputation or registration or these kinds of things, if they can continue to exist, then the commercial actors will be just fine. And I'd rather that we think about them as the sort of straw man.
Yeah, I think that's valid. They're obviously not our customer, but I did read in Tech Policy, Daphne Keller wrote about this recently, and she talked about how research funding is difficult, and it's made more difficult by the idea that their scraping activities might get a cease and desist.
This is Daniel. What I'm hearing, I mean, from what Bobby said, for example, is that basically there's the cat and mouse game will persist no matter what we do in this working group, because the supposedly bad actors and many of the legitimate actors, like the ones that Alyssa identified, can't afford to participate or won't participate in some system like this. And that means that the websites are going to continue to have to do all of the cat and mouse work that they're currently doing And what we're doing here is we're creating a fast lane for a small number of too big to fail organizations. Seems not great.
Right. I mean, I think we saw Cloudflare has an early implementation with browser-based, for example. We're in a scraping platform, and there's these AI scraping platforms that have wrapped around browser-based. And so all of a sudden you have this sort of startup that comes out of nowhere. They don't have like the same capabilities we have, but they can wrap around and piggyback off of Cloudflare's relationship with browser-based. We find it very strange. It's like where you're picking privileged sort of winners. It seems a very strange way to think of it. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so Emil from Orange. So I don't see the issue for mission critical services to authenticate to get that data. I don't see the concerns.
To authenticate?
When you're talking about, sorry, I think you're talking about like the kinds of groups that Alyssa was describing, right? Cultural heritage groups, researchers, and so on. Yeah.
Any organization in charge of mission critical, they can authenticate on a website.
I don't think that Walmart wants Amazon to scrape them. I don't think they're going to give them a login to allow them to authenticate. Okay. I don't think that X is going to do that for the Center for Countering Hate. I don't, McDonald's and Burger King are not going to want them on each other's sites.
All right, I think thank you everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. All right, we're gonna have some, yeah, thank you. We're going to have more general conversation, but before I reopen the queue, I think I'm going to go off on a limb here and say that perhaps what we should have had is a second buff. We might have jumped the gate a little bit here with the charter that we landed on. Yeah, from what we're hearing from the chair podium and what we heard during the buff, this is a real problem that folks are interested in solving. What we heard loud and clear today is perhaps the current charter is a bit more in the solution space, and that solution space is maybe not the right solution space. So we're going to kind of reopen the mic lines and have a conversation. But I think overall, what we think might need to happen next is to take a few step backs and have an architecture/requirements document describing the space more and see if we land on that. And if we agree to that, then we can go back to solution space. So we're going to skip all the presentations today that were in the solution space. So I really apologize to everyone who put in a lot of effort to make slides for us. I'm sorry about that. That's on us, the chairs. But given the discussion, I think it makes sense to keep it high level and not go into the solution space today. So with that, we're going to reopen the mic lines kind of on the high level problems to be solved, requirements for solutions, and architectures. And I see Marcus first.
Yeah, Mark Nottingham. Hello. I think this is interesting for me because the perspective that, I called that meeting, I guess we had in Bangkok before I got violently ill. That was fun. The perspective that we were coming at it from was, the harms that Sarah was talking about, which I agree, those are all very concerning. They're already happening. People are already using IP addresses and other mechanisms to select bots and to treat them differently. And so, and in a really sometimes quite awful way. I mean, you talk about, aggregating power to just a few entities. Everybody knows Google's IP addresses. Nobody knows my bot's IP address, I'm not surprised, Ecker. So the framing that I have when I think about this is, given that this is already happening, and you listen to site operators as well as CDN folks, and they're screaming for, they need better tools for dealing with this traffic, because, especially in these exciting times we live in, there's lots of crazy bots doing crazy stuff. How do we create an ecosystem that avoids or is better than the outcomes we're seeing now? And that goes to how do we, what we talked about on the slides, how do we introduce new bots more easily in a more equitable way? How do we make sure sites are able to operate in a more reasonable way? And cryptographic authentication of bots seemed like a good primitive to start with to enable that, rather than using IP to identify bots. But it certainly is not enough. And I think the question is, what tools do we need to compose to get to a better outcome? Acknowledging that there are some things that we're not going to be able to solve. We're not going to be able to require every website in the world to just open up all their content and make it free to all comers, because that would be nice, but that's unfortunately that's not the web that a lot of people want to create.
Yeah, John Levine. This is going to be slightly discursive, but I think I have a point. Like many people here, I've had side gigs doing expert witness stuff. And one of my first cases 20 years ago was Field versus Google, where Field put up a website and he sued Google for scraping it for making their search index. And the judge came down firmly on Google's side, but part of the reason was that they said, we have robots.txt, and so the argument, the claim that it is legal to scrape websites is true-ish, but there's always been conditions to it. And then maybe 10 years ago, I had a case here in Canada called Zoocasa versus Century 21. Century 21 is a bunch of real estate agents. Zoocasa was kind of a predecessor to Zillow, run by the local phone company. And this was much like what Sarah was talking about. Century 21 did not want their competitors scraping their website, and it went to court. And here in Canada, at least, the court agreed. Like Century 21 could tell Zoocasa to go away, and Zoocasa had to go away. And shortly after that, there was another case called Kragers versus Craigslist. Craigslist very carefully arranges their website so that what you see is relative to where you are. I mean, if you want to see, you can see like real estate listings in New York, and you can see real estate listings in Montreal, but you can't see all the real estate listings in the Northeast. Kragers attempted to scrape the whole thing and, and combine it. Craigslist did not like it. I was talking to the Kragers people whose lawyers were making rather desperate arguments that I have to say sounded a certain amount of like what Sarah was saying. Like, well, it's public information, it's on the internet. Whereas once again, the court said, no, if they tell you to stop, you have to stop. And I've seen some other, and like everybody else, I've been affected by AI scraping bots, and if OpenAI says that they scrape responsibly and they do not hammer on their website, I have logs to say otherwise. So I think, so the message here is that I totally agree that being able to identify bots is important. But I think it is also important that you need that sort of having bots only identified by some sort of anonymous nonce is not going to be useful, because for this to be useful and for websites to let anybody in, they're going to need to know, to at least to some degree, who they're letting in and who they aren't. And if Amazon doesn't want to let Walmart scrape, too bad. But to make that work, there has to be a way that Amazon can believe that this bot is Walmart and that bot is not. So again, going back to what I talked about, Mark, I don't really know to what extent vouching and authentication can be made to work, but I do think that some kind of authentication, that your real world authentication in practice is going to be absolutely essential for us to make any progress and for website operators to be willing to use it.
That was a helpful segue, because I think it actually distinguishes two use cases, one of which I think is moderately uncontroversial and one of which I think is extremely controversial. And the first use case, the one that's uncontroversial, is managing traffic load on your site. And if someone is giving you an enormous amount of traffic load, you may wish to have some way to manage that. And I think that was how this was motivated by Mark's presentation and has motivated by much of the discussion. And the second is selecting which people by name should be allowed to access your data and which should not be allowed to access your data. And it's not clear to me that is a good idea. And it's not clear to me that IETF should be attempting to facilitate that. Now, again, as I said earlier, it may be the case that we have to do that in order to do the first, or it may not. But I think it'd be really helpful to discuss whether the purpose of this working group is to allow sites to exclude automated traffic from people they don't like, who's using the traffic and using their content in the way they don't like it, or if it's merely to allow them to exclude excessive, abusive, or whatever term abusive use is. And it's worth noting that the one case we have where we do allow that, robust.txt, is entirely advisory. Like you can say Googlebot don't scrape me, but you can't stop them. And so for us to, so I think like that's a great. So I think that's a great cut point that we should be trying to resolve, because if we are in fact trying to facilitate the second case, which I think you can tell I think we probably shouldn't, then the solution space gets quite a bit smaller and quite a bit simpler in some respects, because we don't have to worry about privacy, for instance. Whereas if we're not trying to, then we should be asking the question, how do we build only the first one and not the second one, if at all possible?
Hey, Bobby Chen. To talk about something that's been discussed a little bit is on centralization and decentralization and certain risks there. I'll say, I work on bot detection. I work for a company called Stitch. You probably have not heard of this company. And that makes us certainly one of the smaller verifiers in the world. And so I'll say that we work with the companies that we serve to help them do, yes, some kind of filtering, some kind of blocking in order to meet the needs of their business. And oftentimes we do see today that there are bots that are being impersonated against. And I'll say, we literally have like an if statement that says, if you claim to be Googlebot, but you don't have certain properties, you are probably not Googlebot. And that probably means that you, historically, this traffic is very abusive. And so one of the problems is that not every bot operator is at the scale of Google where we know about them. They might not even have their own dedicated IP blocks or things like that. Those are kind of the traditional solutions in this space. And so I thought the original proposal was one reasonable way of getting to a place where you could at least confirm that someone is not impersonating certain other bots. And that is something that is useful. I was originally going to give a talk about signature agent. I'll talk a little more generally. I think basically the discoverability of whatever mechanism that comes out of this is very useful. I don't think that it would be valuable to have something that basically requires a N verifiers to M bots relationship where everyone must talk to everyone else in order to discover some useful piece of information about them.
Hi, I think I wanted to respond to, I think, Ecker's comment mainly. I'm Chris Patton, Cloudflare. I think, yeah, so the first point he made was, if this is about traffic managing, that's the problem we should solve. If it's about distinguishing and being able to treat different types of actors differently, that is absolutely not something we should do. I think what I've learned today, just speaking personally for myself, I didn't view this as an area where privacy was a problem. I now see that it is, because not because there's a human in the loop, but because there's an organization that it wants to that doesn't want to be treated differently from anybody else. And I personally, I take that to heart. I think that's something we need to instill in this system. There's probably use cases where, like a non-repudiable signature is fine. There might be certain bots on the web that don't mind being identified as themselves. But there's going to be a lot of situations where we need to treat them equally, and we need to I think it's incumbent on us to figure that out. So it was, I talked a little bit about the solution space in the chat. Sam, I think, mentioned it. There are things we can do to implement certain security, very specific security policies in a privacy preserving way. So I'm thinking about rate limiting. That's a really nice concrete one. Yeah, we don't want one bot to consume too many resources. The other one that's been mentioned, which is really concrete, is you should be dinged if you violate robots.txt or whatever AI preference the website is expressing. The solution might be anonymous credentials. So folks might not have heard of this, but we're talking about them at Privacy Pass. It's sort of a generalization of what we do with Privacy Pass today, where you get a token that's issued blindly, and then you can use that to access a resource once. Anonymous credentials allow you to access resources multiple times with the same credential, with certain restrictions applied to that credential. I mean, I'm not gonna I guess we should maybe talk about it at the next WEBBOTAUTH or the BOF when we return to that process. But yeah, I just I think there is a way to thread the needle. It's going to be more expensive than just a digital signature, but we can do it, and let's try to do it.
Hi, I'm Farzan Abadi, Digital Medusa. So I just wanted to say, I mentioned this when we were discussing the charter as well. I don't think we should use the word identification. I think that's where the problem is. We are talking about authentication of bots. Now, I have problems with that too, and the ways that we do it. But what we are talking about, and also the problem that there's this problem in the room that we are trying to solve, and we haven't talked about the problem much in a more scientific way. The problem is that these bots, they go to sites and they overwhelm their network, and it's a technical issue. When we talk about abusive, we mean in a technical way. Is that right? Or are we after bad actors? And also, this is also a very terrible term to use. But what are we talking about here? Is this a technical issue that we are trying to solve, which I believe it is because we are at IETF? And another thing is that when we focus on technical issue, we mean that, okay, so this bot, I want to be able to see that this bot that at this minute, it visited my website and it overwhelmed my network, I want to be able to block it. Is that not the purpose? But they already do that. So I think that we really need a little bit of more research and to understand the problem, to get stats on how site operators get overwhelmed by bots and what is this technical bot behavior that is abusive. And as a result of that, we should authenticate them or not, or come up with other mechanisms. And we should also not forget that there are other mechanisms outside of the IETF for holding bots accountable and responsible. We shouldn't forget about that either. It's not like bots are just just going around and not being held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Roman?
Roman Danilou speaking as an individual. I have a non-technical observation. I'm hearing a little bit of a mismatch kind of here on expectations. I would love to, if folks came to the line to talk about how we could align those kind of expectations. One observation I would make is one of the suggestions that was made here was maybe we need an architecture document or use case document. One thing I might point out is the charter does not allow for that, because the charter immediately says we're going to jump into writing specifications only. So it's something to kind of consider as we chart the new course here.
Yes, thank you for that, Roman. This is the part where I would normally lean on our responsible area director to come and speak, but unfortunately Mike had to run off for a NomCom interview. We're doing those this week. We still have a few folks in queue. And I'll go to Victoria.
Hi, my name is Victoria Noble. I'm from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a nonprofit that strives to protect users and ensure that the internet serves everyone, not just a small number of small companies. I'm extremely concerned that identifying bots or creating a way to make sure we can always identify them versus sort of try to, the way it is now, where it sort of works but doesn't always work, is going to create too many bad uses and create too many avenues for discrimination against competitors, journalists, anyone trying to hold the website accountable, which are often large companies. Sarah gave a great example of X. There are really good reasons to allow these bots to access and scrape this information anonymously and not facilitate a way for them to be detected and identified and blocked. One thing I saw in the chats that I found really concerning was, and wanted to push back on, was the idea that just because some of these bots are already being blocked means that this isn't really a problem, a new problem, right? This is something that already exists. This isn't going to make it worse. I think that's wrong. I think the fact that, I think it's terrible that people are getting blocked for these reasons, but creating a way to block them better and identify them better and reduce the avenues that still exist to scrape anonymously is not a good world. That is not the internet that we want to create, and I don't think we should be creating a tool to do that. On the other hand, the kinds of scraping activities that hit a site too hard and knocks it offline, for example, or stresses its resources too much from a technical standpoint, those are problems that we could solve with a technical solution. I don't think this identification avenue is a good one.
Thank you, Victoria. And sorry for that. Our responsible AD just walked back with none of the context, so we can blame everything on him. It'll be great. Nalini is next in queue.
Hi, Nalini Elkins. So I've heard a bunch of stuff about people dissing IP addresses as being a way of tracking. Well, people are doing their best, and there's a real infrastructure set up around IP addresses for geolocation and everything else. And yes, I know it's inadequate, but what I'm trying to say is, like, people are doing their best, and we need something, and it's a de facto standard. It's kind of like if I know your zip code, I probably know quite a bit about you. And so, as I say, if you're going to try and do something that has the kind of penetration that IP address identification does, great. I hope it works. I'm not being snide. It should. I hope it does.
Thanks. Go ahead, Sarah.
So I want to thank you for the comment about the IP addresses. I agree that they are a good way to identify bots for providers that are following data collection standards and are using the right kind of IPs and using them in a way that they can be notified by websites. And that comes down to, again, data collection standards, aligning on how data collectors should be behaving so that we can basically, we want these sites to succeed. We don't want them to suffer, right? That we don't think that Sequentum's customers are a technical problem for these sites, right? We do obsess about not hitting a site too hard, and we have all kinds of mechanisms that we use to make sure that we don't harm a site. So we don't think that we fall into that category of a technical problem. But when I look at something like WEBBOTAUTH, I just think this is just trying to take the cat and mouse game and put it into sort of the architecture of the internet. And so for me, I just, I do think, I forget his name from Stitch, he's got a good point that it's worth having some non-spoofable record of who the bot was or what the cryptographic signature was for the bot, right? So that if somebody does sue you or there is a problem, both the site and the scraping platform have a record of who it was, did what traffic, right? Because then you can basically agree on what the scope is of, whatever the problem is. But I just, it just seems to me like another sort of escalation of the cat and mouse game. It doesn't seem like a real solution. So it's not really.
Thank you, Sarah. Lucas?
Hey, Lucas Pardew, Cloudflare. So I don't really have an opinion on the technical aspects of this, but just an observation as I've sat in the corner soaking up the different perspectives. So like I really appreciated that. It kind of reminded me of some of the discussion we had with the Scone working group, that there's a lot of practices that are out there already that are maybe not clear to everyone, and that some of the efforts here are shining a light on things that are already happening in such a way to level the playing field for some of those folks who aren't maybe necessarily aware of them and want to become new entrants into the market. I'm not saying that's true and that's an assertion, but that's kind of the feeling I'm getting from it. And in those Scone working group bot forming sessions, etc., there was ways we could have gone that wouldn't have been so great, and there were ways that we're going now that are doing a certain design. So just for others, I think like I could see a pathway to this, even if we're going backwards slightly from where we think we were, that I do think there is a needle we could thread towards something that does well. What that looks like, I have no opinion on.
Thank you, Lucas. And actually, I think that's a great segue for us to sort of wrap up. So to get you up to speed, Mike, we had as you know, we had a BOF last time where we didn't quite agree on all the bits of the charter. The working group was chartered between last IETF and this one. And we realized in this session that perhaps we didn't land on the right charter. Maybe that's too much of a euphemism. I think we have a charter that is very specific and gung-ho about let's jump into the solution space. And it turns out that I don't think the charter got the right solution space based on the feedback we've received today. I think from a lot of the comments we heard from the room, we need to take multiple steps back and talk about architecture and requirements. One of the slightly unfortunate aspects, as Roman pointed out, is our charter doesn't allow us to publish those, but I think that doesn't prevent us from discussing those. So what I would propose, and Mike, please tell us what you think, is that we move this conversation to the list and focus on architecture and requirements, encourage the proponents to write a draft really specific on that, and kind of go from there, discuss. I think Lucas phrased it really well. There's a lot of unsaid assumptions from like everyone has a different view of this elephant. And I think through that discussion on the list, we'll be able to tease those out. And hopefully from there, we'll kind of know where we want to go. And maybe from there, either we recharter this group in that new direction or something else. But I think that's probably our best bet as a next step.
All right. Well, I will say that my next step is going to be to go watch the recording of the session. But yeah, let's go back to the list and let's get that feedback. Even if we aren't chartered to publish a document, we can still review drafts. We can clarify what our assumptions are, and let's redraft the charter and get all of those comments involved in the drafting before we go to the ISG. So.
Yeah, I'll volunteer to write a straw man use cases, and I think counter use cases or things that we don't want this to be used for, and so we can try and, as was said, thread that needle to make a mechanism that serves the intent here, but can't be used for purposes that are undesirable in this discussion. Now, whether that's going to be technically achievable, like Lucas, we'll see, but I think that might help.
All right, thank you. Sean?
Hey, I just want to thank the chairs for doing a masterful job of taking the hand grenade and turning it from doing something that's crazy into something was pretty good. I really think we ended up in a better spot. So thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. That was the first meeting of WEBBOTAUTH at IETF. And we'll see you on the list.